Hello and welcome to Fortune India What podcast. Today I have with me a media veteran turned entrepreneur, Apurva Purohit, founder of the food brand Azol. Well, have you all tried the Azol products? If you haven't, I would strongly recommend that you do. Well, some of my personal favorites are their amras and their mahua laddu. They're not just delicious, but they are freshly made and nutritious. But the most exciting part of the Azul story is that all their products are made by women of self help groups across Maharashtra. Apurva, welcome to the Fortune India podcast.
Thank you, Atika.
You've always been a media, a corporate person all your life. And it will be interesting to hear from you as to what made you, that moment when you decided to become a social entrepreneur. And was it really planned or did it just happen by chance?
So I think at different points in time, Achita, uh, we have different interpretations of what is meaningful life for each one of us. So in my earlier avatar, I drew meaning from running good organizations, building good brands, creating leaders. Over a period of time, it became more about working with women, creating women leaders, and encouraging women to stay in the corporate world and fulfill their potential. As I grew older, I started asking myself the question is when will there come a time when we will start giving back? Especially people like us who grew up post liberalization, got a lot of opportunities, garnered a lot of wealth, resources, experience. And I think I started thinking that if we can't use the experience we've got and the resources we've got to solve for the myriad social problems our country faces, to solve for the inequality that we are increasingly seeing around us, who will solve for them? So that's where I said that for me now the meaning of life really, or what is a meaningful life, is about giving back, solving for the inequality that we see existing around us. And that's where the germ of the idea of Azol really started.
That's interesting. Azul is all about self help groups, women working in various self help groups. So, apart from building a purposeful business, what did you have to do to ensure that it also made good business sense?
Ajita, that's a very, very important nuance that you're bringing to our conversation, because on the one hand, there are a lot of NGOs who for years have been doing good. But I think they do good in a very limited manner because they don't think of scale or sustainability. For me, whether it's running a corporate business, whether it's running a for profit business, whether it is running a social impact venture, whether it's running an NGO or a foundation, unless you scale or unless you become sustainable, you will not be able to create long term impact. And therefore our focus on Azol was, on the one hand, we are very clear about our purpose. Our purpose is to solve for the rural unemployment that exists in our country. Okay, especially work with women and empower them through creating employment for them. On the other hand, while this is the purpose of the business, on the other hand, I need to make it sustainable and thus scalable. And to do that, I apply all the business tenets that we've always learned. How do you how do you ensure that you are fulfilling a customer need? How are you filling a customer need gap that you see around us? We don't want our customers to buy the product because it is being made by uh, rural women, or because it is creating employment for women, or because it's solving the inequality gap that we see here. I want customers to buy the product because it's tasty, because it's nutritious, it has health benefits, it's solving for the carbon footprint when you buy products, when you import food products versus buying products which are regional, local, fresher, preservative free. Those are the needs that I'm fulfilling with our customer, and I'm telling the customer buy it for these reasons. And when we marry a customer need, when we marry a market gap that exists to a social purpose, I think you can build very powerful businesses which are both sustainable and scale.
Interesting. But when it comes to the products per se, what really went in when you decided what product to kind of build, how to build the product portfolio, how to scale it up, because your products are quite different. You don't get it with a regular large food brand won't have it. So you have products like an Amras, which are or a Mahua laddu or your chikkis and other sweets. Even the varieties of rice that you have and that you offer, it's not easily and readily available. They are quite niche. So how do you build a brand out of niche categories?
So, firstly, I would like to correct you by saying that they're not all of them are not niche products. Okay, so some of them are niche or seasonal, like the amras or mahua laddu, which is a very specialized product from a region. The way we looked at Azol was, firstly, let's take Maharashtra, because that, in a sense, I define as my Karam Bhumi. I've always lived in Bombay and Maharashtra, and we said let's start from sourcing from rural enterprises that exist in the state. Uh, the other thing we did was we looked at provenance. Provenance for us is very important. So we went to all the districts of Maharashtra and said, okay, what is the special food of this region? What is grown? What is the crop that is grown in this particular area? Or what is the masala or the chutney that is made by this particular community? From there evolved a basket of products. So Indrayani rice, which is endemic to the Kasare region. Mahua laddu, which you like very much, is from grown by the or made by the tribals from the Nandurbar region, where Mahua tree is extensively, where the Mahua tree exists. Agri masala is made by the Agri community. Malwani masala from the Malwan region. Solapuri peanut chutney from Sholapur. So we looked at the provenance of each of the districts and each of the products that exist from that come from there. Then we also looked at what is a Maharashtrian meal, or what is in general an Indian meal consist of. So the thali that we talk about. So staples on the one hand, things like ghee, etc. on the other hand. Then the different masalas that are required to make your dals and your amtis and your sabzis. Then the chutneys and the thechas and the papads, and then the sweets. So actually we looked at it from three different perspectives: the provenance of the product, the different types of the products, and the products that exist across the different communities and regions of Maharashtra.
So the idea was always to have both center of plate as well as side.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay, okay. And again, you source all your products from Maharashtra. So, I mean, it would obviously cater to the Maharashtra palate. But in India, there's so much of diversity. Every 50 kilometers radius, the food habits change. And if I'm not mistaken, your intent is to build a national brand. So, what is your scaling up plan? Do you look at going into other geographies and also kind of focus on other local cuisines? How do you plan to take it forward?
So interestingly, while you're absolutely right that the food habits change every 50 kilometers, and a particular kala masala that is from Pune is not necessarily the same kala masala that people use at Bombay. The fact also exists that increasingly the Indian customer is becoming very local forward in terms of trying different cuisines, experimental, and willing to look at mixing and matching, fusion. So can I make a pindi chana, which is a very North Indian delicacy, using kala masala from Maharashtra? So both from an experimental perspective, from an experience perspective, and the whole concept of local forward, healthy foods, uh, regional foods, fresh foods, is something that increasingly the Indian customers seeking. And I think that's really where Azul comes in, where it fulfills this need in many ways. So we ourselves, when we first started, we said that these are homegrown foods of Maharashtra. Azul is homegrown foods of Maharashtra. But 50% of our customers today are non-Maharashtrian. So we supply all over the country. So we are getting customers from Jammu Kashmir, we are getting customers from the Andamans, we are getting customers from every region and state of the country.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Again, when you kind of retail freshly made products, supply chain must be quite a nightmare. So how are you, kind of navigating the various supply chain challenges? How are you? Because I'm sure the shelf lives also must be limited. It won't be having long shelf lives. So how are you managing all of that?
Post COVID, the country saw a supply chain revolution. And I think the from the warehouse of or the manufacturing unit to the customer, more or less the ecosystem has solved for the supply chain issues. So today you're getting products from anywhere in the country within 2 to 5 days to the warehouse and logistic chains that have now come up, the aggregators that are around us everywhere. I mean, that's really why quick commerce is doing so well in, especially in the grocery segment. So I think that chain, the ecosystem itself had solved for all the challenges there. Where we specifically faced challenges and we solved for them was when we had to bring them from various parts of Maharashtra. Well, we think of Maharashtra as a state, but actually it's like a mini country. You have to bring it from hundreds of kilometers away. And see, because we want our products are fresh, because they are preservative free, because we make them in small batches, because that's the whole concept that as handmade or as जो तुम खाना अपनी नानी के घर का खाते थे, that type of khana, if we are giving you, we make them only in small batches. Thus, twice a month from 26 different areas of Maharashtra, we bring the products to our warehouse and then dispatch it to the customer. So the way we've solved for that supply chain issue is, firstly, our pipeline runs twice a month. So it's not that we get the products, they lie for 45 days in a warehouse and then they take another 30 days to reach the local warehouse and then so on and so forth. We have invested a lot of money, and that's really why when our products are premium, the premiumness really comes from ensuring that we get as fresh a product to the customer's plate as quickly as possible. So our investment really has been in ensuring that every 15 days the women are making the products and sending it to us.
So, for a large food company, this kind of a model may not be very economically viable. But the need of the hour, the consumer wants fresh food. And I mean, the freshness quotient is very high. So what really can say a Nestle or an Amul learn from an Azul? What would be their two big learnings?
So it would be very presumptuous of us to say that what a company like Nestle and Amul can really learn from us. We have to learn from giants like Amul and Nestle. The only point I would make is, increasingly in FMCG especially, we are seeing this whole concept of disruptor brands, right? So there is, while we can segment the customer in different ways, whether it's geographies or regional preferences or economic profiles, I think we can also segment customers in a not only a vertical way but a horizontal way. So if you horizontally dissect the customer, there is a volume based customer looking for, he has a certain limited income, he has only this much money for essentials, and he's looking for value for whatever money he has. His grocery basket is limited. So then there are lots of brands who will supply for them, the mass brands. Then you move slowly up to the mass premium segment, and then the premium segment, and then there is a, you may call it a niche customer, I may call it a super premium customer, or I may call up a customer who's wanting to think of food as medicine. I think if you dissect the customer on those lines also, on how they think of a particular category. So I can think of groceries as just, something roti, kapda, makan equivalent. I can think of groceries as the essentials. I can think of groceries as luxury. I can think of groceries as food fulfills this particular need in my mind. And food for me is medicine. The healthier food I ingest, the better. And I think increasingly all of us are becoming very wellness conscious. So I think we are targeting that particular segment. Okay. And when you think of the customer like that, and you position again is a you genuinely sell your product on the basis of wellness needs, then you come to the conclusion that enough and more customers who are willing to pay for good quality, high quality, preservative free, clean label, a kind of which kind of khana. And I think that's how we really look at the customer. So I think the lesson that I draw from there, and the lesson that is that India is so complicated, so diverse, that frankly, if you have a good product, you can dissect and segment the market in a way that you will always find a segment for you.
So you call yourself a disruptor brand. So disruptor brand, does it really make sense to remain digital first, or do you see yourselves available in a kirana store closer to a consumer's house?
So I think disruptor brand one can look at from different ways, right? So what is a disruption we are doing? Let us be very clear. What is a disruption we are doing? One is the way I talked about it, that if you look at food as medicine, and you look at the wellness segment, the people who are really keen about eating good quality food, they will be willing to pay whatever money you want for it. You recognize that they are willing to pay top dollar for it, then you give them that kind of product, and then it doesn't matter. See, all of us talk of, as we scale up, we all start talking about efficiencies and economies of scale, etc., etc. But for us, economies of scale is coming from ensuring that we don't just mass produce and keep it. That could be one way to do economies of scale. We are saying we are giving you economies of scale by ensuring that the velocity of getting our products is very high. And that's where we are willing to put in money, and that's where we are also asking you to pay for money. See, pay for the money. If you want fresh food, I have to ensure high velocity. And if I have to get velocity from some of the most remotest parts of Maharashtra, then it will cost you money. That is the disruption. It's not about saying how much cheaper can I make a product. It is about saying, you pay me a premium for my products, but I will ensure that I'm giving you best quality. I think that's the disruption on the one hand we are doing. Now, if we think about that as our single line statement, that disruption is where we are giving you freshest food for which you should be willing to pay a premium, but we promise you freshest food because through velocity. Okay, that's my statement. Then I should be able to ensure velocity everywhere. So digital is of course one way, and that ecosystem has very beautifully been created post COVID for every type of brand, and that's why there are so many digital brands that you see existing and doing well in the country. Equally, increasingly the world is becoming hybrid, whether it is in the way we work, whether it is in the way we run our lives, right? So there are enough customers who are seeking freshness through digital brands, who are seeking, and I'm talking of food brands, of course, seeking freshness through quick commerce, seeking freshness through your kirana store. So I have to be omni-channel. Then the distribution vehicle or the vertical or where the product is visible, in a sense, is I'm neutral to it.
A disruptive brand need not just be digital first.
But not at all.
Yeah.
Disruption is in the way you do business. We have to decide in which way are we changing how everybody is doing business. So as I explained to you, so for me, disruption is to saying that yes, I will give you fresh food. I will give you just have to pay the premium for it, and I will ensure that it reaches. And I think the other disruption that we are talking about, Ajita, is that can social impact and profitability coexist? So circling back to the question you asked, right, in the because people seem to think that there is a narrow view of social impact, that social impact should always be about running it like an NGO or a foundation and looking for donations to keep it alive, or profitability is only about the capitalist mentality that you're maximizing profitability for yourself. But I think we are doing neither. We are minimizing losses for ourselves. We want to make it break even. We want to run Azol as a business which is doing good, but in a sustainable manner, applying the tenets that we've learned in business school.
So I'm curious to know what kind of, skin in the game do the women SHGs have?
The way we interact or the way we partner with our women SHGs is, firstly, we tell them that this is the product that you've been making for generations, right? You are the experts, you are our partners, you are our genuine partners, so we are coming to you on an equal footing. It's not that we are a white knight who's coming to save you. So there's an equal partnership between the two of us. So you make the products just as you've been making them for centuries, generations. Your forefathers have been growing that crop or making that masala. Give me the best quality. I will pay you upfront. Whether I'm able to sell or not sell, whether my product expires or whatever, you will get fair prices. So, firstly, we buy products from them upfront. We send them packaging. So, in that velocity and the point that I was making to you about getting the goods, then we first send packaging to them, they pack in the products, then we get it back. And we do that twice a month. So, package fair prices, packaging is sent. We bring it here. Then once it reaches our warehouse, then it's our problem of marketing it, of getting a customer to buy it, of promoting it, what have you. We also do a lot of training. Under the FSSAI guideline, we do a lot of training with the with these women and the farmer communities. What we have seen as a consequence of that, this Ajita, is that the moment regular income is coming to them, and without them having to leave the villages, because there are no other jobs there. So they were traditionally having to migrate. They would go to Gujarat to do some construction work, etc. Having to live in squalor and slum, leaving those beautiful forests or farms, and then having to go and live in squalor. So that has stopped. The impact on their children, where they don't get disrupted in terms of having to leave school or health issues, etc., that has got neutralized, and therefore lifestyles in those villages have improved. Most importantly, the sense of self-esteem and self-respect. मेरा product सारे देश में बिकता है. So we are seeing a lot of positive outcomes out of what we are trying to. And at the base of it was that let's create employment at the places they stay in, rather than having to approve them and say, now, come to a bigger sheher for your needs of livelihood.
So you ran Jagran, and before that for Radio City for decades. Uh, is there any learning that you took from there and implemented into Azul? And or was there any reverse learning? It'll be interesting to hear about it.
Two things happened. So one is, of course, you draw learning from 30 years. If I spend, there was a whole host of things that I learned that I apply here. And one is that at the fundamental level, all businesses are alike, whether it's a media business, whether it's an advertising business, whether it is running a business publication or running a food brand. I mean, if you go back to first principles, P&Ls are P&Ls. So you are looking at how to optimize costs, you're looking at how to generate revenue, you're looking at customer needs, because without customer need, nothing exists, right? So I think always looking at first principles, because as we grow senior and senior and we make our lives and our thinking so complex, we forget about first principles. I think throughout my conversation with you, I've been talking about sustainability as a tenet for running a good business. And unless a business is generating profit, how will it become sustainable? So let's not worry about things like valuation, because valuation is only about top line. Let's look at how are we building a business that will last, correct? I think that's the fundamental lesson that I learned earlier, and I'm applying it here. In terms of unlearning, I would say that especially, at the stage that I was in my career, you had reached a certain stature. You reach a certain stature. So then from there, when you have to start from zero base all over again. So I think you have to practice a lot of humility. So there are a lot of things that you don't know. There are a lot of youngsters who will know more than you. Yeah. The world is changing. So unless you say that, no, I don't know enough, I need to start learning from zero. So if you can balance the two, that there is so much learning I had, which will come in use, but at the same time I have to start all over again from scratch. You can manage that balance well. I think at any stage you could evolve in.
Interesting. You've been a champion of diversity, equity, and inclusion for the longest time. You've written books on that. So uh, it'll be just, I'm curious to know about your journey as a woman entrepreneur because whenever I meet women entrepreneurs, many of them have told me that how difficult it is for them to raise funds from investors. So because the moment you're a women-led organization, investors don't want to invest in you. Did you have any such encounters?
So I think the figures speak for themselves. It is a fact that less than 2% of VC funding goes to women entrepreneurs. Now, that could be for multiple reasons. One is that there are just not enough women entrepreneurs for the money to go to. The other reason possibly is that the issues any woman, any minority faces, that there are certain biases that always exist. And also, fundamentally, I believe that women themselves don't talk about their brands, their businesses, the business ideas in a as confident manner as one would like to. Because I also sit on the other side where I'm looking to fund businesses, and I see the difference between how men entrepreneurs talk and how women entrepreneurs talk. So there is a slight lack of confidence, which also results in the funder not being confident about whether he should invest in a woman's business. As far as I'm concerned, fortunately, I have not faced too many biases. It possibly comes from the fact that, given my background experience, people do know what I've done, that your work speaks for itself. So I haven't had.
So, what kind of, in what stage of evolution are the women and the grassroots? Are they, I mean, what kind of questions do they ask you and how involved are they in the business?
So very interestingly, when you talk to the women self-help groups and you talk to the farmer community, etc., they are very, very smart women. Okay, which is why they have been able to get together a group of women, form the self-help group in the first place, etc. Many times, of course, you also see that when you go and talk to people, that the name may be of the woman, but a lot of work is being done, or the finances are being controlled by the male members in the family. So you do see that side also. So maybe the work is being done by the woman. The name of the Mahila Guru Greh Udyog is in her name, but the finances are being managed by the male, or he's the one who's doing the talking or the negotiations. So you do see that bit also, but I'm always heartened by the fact that there may be lakhs and thousands of women in villages, but a certain segment has got up despite the severe odds that they face, the patriarchy that exists, the fact that the social norms and the mores that you should not leave your house, or you're supposed to do after marriage, you're only supposed to do this and not do that. Despite all the challenges they face, they've been able to come out of that and say, I want to. I hear women say, और कुछ मुझे नहीं करना था, मुझे ये पता था कि मुझे अपना पैसा और अपना घर अपने आप से चलाना है. I don't want to rely on the charity of my relatives or even take money from my husband. I want to do something. Or somebody else saying, I know what a good cook I am. I just wanted to ensure that my chikki is tasted by people beyond my beaches. So they have, from that ambition has come from inside them despite the situation they are.
So, Indian women want to take charge of their lives, and that's an increasing trend that you see. That's really heartening to know. So, where do you see Azol, coming back to Azol, where do you see Azol 5 years from now?
So, see, our ambition for Azol is very vast. We are currently impacting thousands of women. We would like to impact lakhs of women. And that's really where we want to grow and build the business. As of now, of course, we are focusing on Maharashtra. My vision is that if I really need to create impact at scale, can it become a plug and play model? So if then people see the model of Maharashtra succeed. Can there be an Azol Gujarat? Can there be an Azol UP? Can there be an Azol Orissa? And this whole model of working with FPOs and women SHGs, creating high quality products which urban consumers recognize as first in quality, taste, and nutrition, can this entire model get replicated across?
I really look forward to, various, an Azul Gujarat, Azul Orissa, or a Bengal coming up, really soon. And I have learned a lot from this discussion. Thank you so much for your time, Apurva. And I mean, I hope all of you enjoyed this discussion. And the one learning I got is that you may be a disruptor brand, but that doesn't mean that you need to remain niche. You can scale up, you can be omni-channel, and you can be across the country. So that was my learning, and I hope all of you have learned a lot from this discussion and more importantly enjoyed this discussion.